You're listening to audio from the Decidedly podcast. For more information, find us on Instagram at Decidedly Podcast.
My grandmother, Lynn Guy, she's coming in. She is a former counselor, also the current reigning undisputed champion of greatest grandmother alive. Tell me about her bio.
Well, 20 years as a licensed practitioner focusing on PTSD, childhood abuse, unresolved trauma. She worked with a lot of survivors of sexual abuse, and she had some rough stories. I mean, she's shared with me, in confidence. I mean, she didn't share names or anything, but just things that she's had to deal with. And I know there are a lot of decisions that somebody has to make to move on from that, to move on from that kind of trauma, that kind of abuse. And sometimes it's not possible, but I thought it'd be appropriate to talk to her on Decidedly, because those are big decisions.
Yes, they are. So hopefully you guys learned something listening to this conversation. Welcome in Lynn Guy. I'm Sanger Smith. This is Decidedly.
So we wanted to have you on Decidedly because of the decisions that you have to deal with in working with people as they work through their recovery from sexual abuse, trauma, physical abuse, whatever that was. And I know that you've helped them sort of work through those. Tell me a little bit about your story as you got into doing that type of work.
Well, that was a big decision in and of itself. For me, I'd been sort of doing lay counseling starting in the early 80s as a group discussion leader in an international Bible study group. And I had a small group of about 12 women assigned to me, and I had to call them every week. And I began to realize that most of what I was doing was not talking about the Bible study, but talking about their own personal issues. And I actually saw benefit from doing that. In fact, I was complimented by my leader for the way in which I was interacting with my group and had created a group cohesiveness around their feeling safe. Yeah. So then I took some training in a spiritual growth group. I and another woman in my church that I was attending at the time, and we went out to San Francisco to the Burlingame Counseling Center and learned how to conduct other kinds of more in-depth spiritual growth groups called Yoke Fellows, where you actually take some psychological testing and then you help people learn how to discuss what they discover from those tests. And I had started working full-time at a university and had a nice position as an assistant to the head of the university. But my most fulfilling role was when students or faculty member or staff member would come into my office and I would interact with them and just listen to them and talk with them. And I realized that what I most wanted to do was counseling. And in order to do that, I was going to need to get certification or licensing. So I got certified as a dispute resolution mediator. I got certified through a group out at Loyola University in Los Angeles as a grief support group counselor. And I still wanted more. And so through a process of my own decision-making, which was gathering information, doing the pros and cons, the costs and benefits, looking at the whys and wherefores of how I could make this happen, I decided to go back to graduate school, quit my job, which was a risk in and of itself, take money out of my retirement fund and moved to Denton, Texas, and enrolled in Texas Women's University in a counseling program there for my master's in counseling, so that I could then become a licensed professional counselor.
What drew you to the grief counseling part of it?
The grief counseling part was interesting because the grief counseling, as I went through it, because I was going through my own grief process because of some family issues that I had learned about and encountered, and the death of my biological father, followed closely by the death of my stepfather, having gone through a divorce, just a lot of grief issues in my own life. And so what I had discovered was that grief in and of itself is just an opportunity to address how one deals with one's own emotions and beliefs and values and relationships. And so that was a very useful and personally cathartic experience.
I had somebody one time share with me that, and I thought it was really smart. And they were struggling with the loss of a relationship, a breakup of a relationship. And they said, you have to go through those steps, those stages of grief on a relationship. Somebody doesn't have to die, but if you're separating from, like a divorce, it's the same steps that you would go through. You grieve that relationship, but if you don't get over it, you're always sort of dealing with that baggage and that issue. Even if that person's not deceased, it's that relationship's over.
Exactly. And there are many kinds of losses. I mean, it's not just a death. It is a divorce, a relationship that maybe was not a marriage, but it was a significant other relationship. The loss of a job, fires, floods, tornadoes, those create opportunities for grief experiences to be very profound and impactful. So any kind of loss is generally followed by a grief process, but people don't always recognize it as grief, because one of the ways in which grief is traditionally dealt with is, well, I'll just kind of pretend this doesn't affect me, this doesn't bother me, I'm going to go on, I'm going to pull up my bootstraps and move along. Or
You're saying that's a bad thing?
No, I'm just saying that's part of the process.
You're saying just stuffing that
but
down.
But if you get stuck in that, yeah.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
all right.
It can cause you to repeat it over and over and over again. But, or people get angry. They get angry, or they engage in some sort of a magical thinking of, ways in which you can rise above it. But grief is not just a linear process. It really is kind of a circular spiral.
What do you mean?
Well, you may go through the same stage numerous times, even though you have, let's say, progressed to a different stage. In other words,
do you circle through the entire process again, or do you sort of bounce around and
go through a wave of anger over and over and over?
Right,
and over.
or is it the whole thing again?
You might go through some degrees of that. Hopefully, if you're getting help or you're helping yourself, and there are a lot of really good books that can help people go through.
Like what?
Grief process. I knew you were going to ask me that as soon as I said it, and I thought, that was wrong. One of the best ones I can think of was one of the founders of the grief resolution process out of California, and it's just called the Grief Resolution Handbook. And it's very step-oriented. Of course, everyone is fairly familiar with the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of grief, which she took from stages of dying.
I'm not familiar with
Kubler-Ross.
I'm familiar with that there are stages of grief, and that's about as far as I get. So I don't know what those are.
Yeah. They are denial, bargaining, anger, sorrow or sadness and acceptance. And acceptance doesn't necessarily mean I'm completely over it. It means I have accepted the reality of this loss, and I may continue to feel sad about it, but I'm no longer going to get caught in the emotions of anger and denial and bargaining. Bargaining is, I think, one that most people get stuck in without even recognizing it. Well, if I do so-and-so, I'll get over it. If I buy that new house, I'll get over it. It
would seem like denial would be very transitory, because you have to deal with that, I would think, very quickly. You can only deny that for so long, right? I mean, you have to accept this happened, this death happened, this divorce happened, this loss happened.
And
right?
the denial stage is not only about denying the loss itself, it's denying that the impact on me personally.
Okay.
You know, emotionally, spiritually, even physically. Some people literally have physical responses to loss.
Did you end up doing a lot of work with people around grief recovery, or was it more in the areas of just getting past abuse issues, sexual trauma, those types of things?
Well, what I found is my training in dealing with grief was helpful in the abuse recovery process, because people went through a grief process.
From abuse?
In that process.
The same sort of steps?
It can be.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Because to recover from the abuse, part of it is, first of all, acknowledging that something happened to you. You didn't cause it. It was an outside event that occurred to you, you know. And the other things that are involved is, you know, of course there's going to be denial. Well, it didn't affect me. It didn't bother me. It doesn't have any effect on my life. I've gotten over it. I've forgotten about it. So it's important to explore, really, are there effects
so you might not
acknowledged.
deny the loss, you deny the grief. You might not deny the loss, you might deny the grief.
Exactly. Yeah.
I would think as long as you're denying it, you don't know, I mean, you're not going to be able to deal with it until you know.
Yeah, I love that strategy.
Just deny it. Yeah. Deny that it happened.
No, I'm not sad.
Yeah. Well, I know. I think I do that a lot. You know, I think I
that was my joke.
Deny that it does. You know, things don't, you know, affect me, but you know they probably do. I think a lot of people do that.
I think a lot of people do that, and what happens is, I think it comes out sideways for people. It comes out in ways that seem, well, that's bizarre. I wonder why I'm so sad about that movie, or my gosh, why that TV show, or that book I just read, or, oh, that commercial, my Lord, it just brought me to tears, you know.
So I heard another counselor say one time that when you are angry, which is kind of some sort of like denial of the grief, I think, you know, or when you're denying feelings, like anger is a really good way to kind of put those feelings into a different emotion. So they said there's 4 different types of anger. It's when I'm angry and you know I'm angry. Mm-hmm. I know I'm angry and you know I'm angry, right? We both know I'm angry. I'm yelling and screaming, right? The other one is I know I'm angry and you don't know I'm angry, right? So I'm quiet and reserved. I'm being polite and doing all the right things, but I'm bottling it up. Then the third one is you know I'm angry and I don't know I'm angry. And that one is interesting because I've been there a lot where people would say, "Hey man, you're angry. Like, calm down." I'm not even angry. It's like, oh yeah, I was probably angry. Yeah. And then the fourth one is neither of us know that I'm angry.
How would that manifest itself, do you think?
So obviously I'm not the expert, but what they said was that it comes out sideways, the same language.
Okay, it comes out in another form.
It comes out in another form, and also anger is generally seen as what is sometimes referred to as an umbrella emotion. In other words, the anger is a shield for sadness or